Wait, how does this work?
You just press the button.
This one?
No, not that one.
You're listening to Press the Button, a Ploughshares Fund podcast dedicated to nuclear policy and national security.
Everything seems impossible until it happens.
Everyone would be affected by a nuclear war.
Our government is planning to spend trillions of dollars to develop new nuclear weapons that we don't need.
You can't win a nuclear war.
We are all experts on nuclear weapons because we are all going to be affected by those nuclear weapons.
And here are your hosts, Joe Cirincione and Michelle Dover.
Welcome back. This is our 35th episode of Press the Button, our 35th in a row without a break. I'm Joe Cirincione, the president of Ploughshares Fund.
And I'm Michelle Dover, director of programs.
And it's great to see you again,
It's
Michelle.
great to see you as well. We have not overlapped for like the last 2 weeks.
Yes, a lot of travel going on. And I was out in San Francisco where we were shipping out mugs to all our listeners who generously donated on Giving Tuesday.
I was so excited to hear about all the mugs we were shipping out. So just thank you to all of the listeners. That was quite a show of support, and I am so excited for you to receive them.
What do we have up on early warning?
A lot. We are covering the Russian offer to extend New START, the NATO summit in London, and the season's greetings from North Korea.
Yes, a Christmas present he's promised.
Yes.
Okay.
And then on the Q&A, we will ask you a question from a listener named Sean about different perspectives related to nuclear weapons and the roles that they serve.
Okay, I don't see these in advance, so I'm
I
looking forward to
enjoy
this.
making the comments as cryptic as I can.
Okay, great. Thank you. And then we get into our interview with Kate Folb, who is the director of the Hollywood Health and Society program at the Norman Lear Center at the University of Southern California. Kate works closely with writers, producers, and directors to get subjects like public health, education, sexual abuse, and nuclear and national security issues into the themes and ideas that are portrayed in some of the top shows on television. It's a fascinating interview. Oh, and Michelle, one of the things that she says is about how we work together on Madam Secretary. Mm-hmm. We play a clip from Tia Leone telling the president that in the case of an alert, if he had to decide when to launch nuclear weapons in case of an attack, he would only have 5 minutes to decide.
Well, yes. Realistically, it is probably 5. However, if public servants are doing their job, hopefully they would buy that president at least 2 more minutes.
Because we time our early warning segment to be 7 minutes.
Exactly. And also, I refuse to do the news in 5 minutes.
Right. We can't. We can't cover the news in 5. How could you possibly decide whether you'll launch your missiles in 5? Well, stay tuned for that.
But as always, please rate, comment, subscribe, and share if you like what you hear. We take your feedback seriously and try to incorporate it into the show.
Well, we have a lot to do, and the clock is ticking.
And now, early warning. Early warning. Early warning. Early warning. A 7-minute synopsis of this week's nuclear news.
Welcome back to Early Warning. I'm your host, Michelle. Today I'm joined by Gabby Tarini, policy analyst at the RAND Corporation. Welcome, Gabby.
Thanks, Michelle.
And John Carl Baker, senior program officer here at Ploughshares.
Hi, Michelle.
So let's see how much of the news we can cover in 7 minutes, starting with New START. Last Thursday, Russian President Vladimir Putin said that Russia was ready to extend New START by the end of 2019 without any more conditions or discussion. And this comes after increasing commentary from Trump officials and his allies on the Hill that any new treaty or extension should only be made if China is included in this bilateral treaty. So this question is to both of you. Why do you think Putin is making this offer now? And is this something the U.S. should do?
It's certainly something the U.S. should do, as we've been saying for quite some time now. But I think the fact that Putin is making this offer now and making it extremely publicly is he's doing it as a way of saying, like, this is not my fault. This is completely up to the Americans. That's where the stoppage is. And if this thing falls apart, those are the folks you should blame. He's also gaining a lot of PR points by doing this, too, and saying, I am not the problem here. This is entirely the U.S., the Trump administration, that is holding up the extension of this vital treaty.
It also looks like Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov will be coming to D.C. this week. Arms control is on the agenda, so we'll see what happens.
I don't know. My hopes are not high, but I really do hope that they actually take him up on it. Our second topic this week, Gabby, last week NATO held a summit in London, which came at a moment when many of the major arms control treaties, as we've just been discussing, are under stress or have been eliminated. We're talking about INF, Open Skies, New START. How are the NATO allies reacting? And do you think they will be open to, like in the case with INF, hosting medium-range U.S. missiles, whether conventional or nuclear? I mean, these are some of the things that have been discussed in this as these treaties are being eroded or eliminated.
The leaders' meeting in London last week was a good opportunity for allies to impress upon President Trump the urgent need to extend New START and remain in the Open Skies Treaty. And allies in Europe are seriously concerned about this downward spiral of arms control. I was at a side event last week where Secretary General Stoltenberg expressed this concern and said that the demise of INF is really serious and NATO needs to find new ways to reinvigorate arms control. As for intermediate range missiles in Europe, I don't think that will happen. In order for them to complicate enemy planning and achieve strategic depth, they would need to be based at a variety of sites in Europe. But to date, no European country has agreed to host them, except for potentially Poland.
It's always Poland.
Some NATO members have suggested that the agreement of all NATO members would be required for such an arrangement. And, if some Europeans did decide to host them and form some kind of coalition of the willing, and some do not, this would further erode NATO's unity and further strain transatlantic relations.
So speaking of this question about unity, I mean, the U.S.'s actions are not the only ones testing the alliance. We've also seen comments from Turkey and France that call into question NATO's relevance to the extent that they agree with NATO policy. What do you see going forward for the alliance in terms of this question about how much unity there actually is and what its purpose is?
So I think first it's important to say that the bar for this summit in terms of alliance unity was quite low. You have the general election in the UK coming up. President Trump is mired in impeachment here in the US. You had President Macron's comment about NATO being brain dead. You had President Erdogan's ultimatum, essentially, that he's not going to support enhanced defense in the Baltic states unless the allies recognize the YPG as a terrorist group. And this all happened before the summit. So the bar was quite low. But I think your point about NATO unity is really important because NATO's comparative advantage is and will always be unity. Russia and China have few allies of their own. So these meetings are really about showcasing that unity. And in that sense, the meeting can't really count as a full success. But I think it's only if these political disagreements within the alliance start to impact its military cooperation will we be in real trouble. And that is certainly not the case. Secretary General Stoltenberg at these side events noted that the alliance is indeed delivering on the substance. You have the largest reinforcement of NATO forces on its eastern flank in a generation, and you have European allies increasing their defense spending. So on substance, NATO is delivering.
Thanks for bringing back the report all the way from London. John Carl, last question is for you. North Korea's ambassador to the UN said in a statement on Saturday that denuclearization is off the table in negotiations with the United States. What does this mean for any attempt to revive negotiations?
Well, it's not a good sign, first off, but to some extent, it's a little nice to hear from the North Koreans that they have no intention of denuclearizing, at least not in the near or medium term, which is something that most analysts of the Korea situation have been saying for some time. They've been recommending that instead of talking about disarmament and denuclearization, we talk about arms control with the North Koreans. Doesn't mean giving up the goal of denuclearization over the long term, but it does mean admitting that it's probably not going to happen right now, especially when you have a partner who's not really willing to consider it. But it's not a good sign. This is happening at the time when the North Koreans just conducted an engine test at the Sohae site. And also this weekend, Trump was tweeting some not so subtle threats to them. So the situation is building towards what could be a crisis. The North Koreans have set an end of year deadline for progress in talks with the United States. And they're talking about delivering us a Christmas gift.
Then we get to choose, right?
We get to choose, yes, whether or not to do what they want. But either way, I don't think this Christmas gift is likely to be positive. We're out of time, essentially. I was talking with Jenny Town from 38 North recently, and she said, expect fireworks at Christmas. So it could be an interesting holiday season.
Season's greetings from Pyongyang. And with that, our time is up. Thank you, Gabby and John Carl, for joining.
Thank you.
Thanks, Michelle.
We get letters. We get stacks and stacks of letters.
And now I have a question for Joe.
Let's go.
From one of our listeners named Sean, who thanked us for putting on a wonderful podcast.
Oh, thank you, Sean.
Sean asks, it's not hard to find security experts at distinguished institutions who support nuclear modernization. Think tactical nukes that might have useful deterrent value or belief that leaving the INF treaty was a good call. So what do these people, who are presumably well aware of the history of nuclear near misses, see in the world that the people on the Ploughshares intellectual wavelength do not? Put differently, what are the main analytical weaknesses of the anti-nuclear outlook?
Okay, Sean, let me take the last part of your question first. I don't think I have any intellectual weaknesses.
Okay.
But I'll try to answer this. Look, I've been in this field for almost 40 years. I wrote my first nuclear article in 1979. So I've been doing this for a while, and I get it. I mean, I've been up in the Hill for 10 years. I've seen a lot of the whole nuclear security landscape, and I think I understand it enough. I just come up with different positions. I'm not missing something. I come to different conclusions. But here's what the pro-nuclear advocates you might consider them the moderates are looking at. And what they're basically doing is they want to maximize options. So nuclear weapons give you attack options. So you see people arguing for a new low-yield nuclear weapon, for example, or why we have to have 3 different delivery mechanisms to deliver our nuclear weapons, because that gives you lots of flexibility. And if you're in the military side of the equation here, that's what you want. You want to have as many options as possible. So I get that. The problem is, what's the trade-off? What's the cost? And that's where we come in and we say the cost is the risk that somebody's going to use one of these options. I'm going to go to a nuclear war. So you can give up some of these options and you'll actually end up being safer. So that's the different frame here. There's also an ideological frame. And I think we still are in a conservative town here in Washington that is not broken from Cold War thinking. Remember, President Obama said that's what he was going to do. The nuclear posture review that he did back in 2010 would break with Cold War thinking. No, it did not. So as a consequence, you still see people in this town who were in favor of arms control, arguing that we need to extend the New START Treaty, for example, because it ensures parity with the Russians. That is, we have to have exactly the number that they have. Well, this has never been true, but it's always been a Cold War tenet. And for example, China only has about 280 nuclear weapons, about 60 that can reach us. That does a great job of deterring us, even though we have 2,000 weapons that could reach them. Okay? So the parity myth, it should have been disproven a long time ago, but it's the kind of thing that's baked in to this town's thinking that we haven't been able to break with. And finally, I have to talk about money and the role of money. Think tanks used to be smaller institutions here in this town. There used to be fewer of them. There's been an explosion of them over the last 20 years. And one of the ways they've grown is they've increasingly accepted government money and private corporation money. So the defense contractors have flooded this town with money. Almost every major think tank gets defense corporation money, gets U.S. government money or foreign government money. And that, I'm sorry, that has got to have an impact on your thinking. I know this. When I was at the Carnegie Endowment, I was enraged about the Iraq War. And I was writing about the mistakes that George W. Bush was making, and I got called into the president's office by one of the leading members of the board, who was a conservative on a corporation, and he was concerned about what I was saying. Now, I didn't change what I was saying, but boy, I was a lot more careful about how I said it. And you see that, I am convinced, in every defense analyst's discussions here in this town. They're trying to be careful, and they tend to err on the side of conservatism and do not want to do anything that's going to rock the boat, especially when, if you're in our side of the equation, you're arguing that we should take weapons away from the military. We should take things that they already have and they should give them up. And if you're going to argue that, you're going to get criticized for weakening our military.
Yeah, it's, this is not a game of Pokemon. We don't have to collect them all, right? And I think, this idea of how multiple options, when taken in the aggregate, create a behemoth of an arsenal, I think is one that we often forget. I think the other piece that I would also just draw out more explicitly is, our nuclear arsenal, our posture is theoretically based on, at its core, a theory of deterrence. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is, in some cases, a fundamental difference in how analysts see deterrence, whether it is a stabilizing force, whether it's something that can be controlled. Yeah. And that really, depending on how you see that, it changes what you think should exist.
We'll have to have another question when we talk about that, because I think it's based on the theory of war fighting.
Yes.
That the force is configured to fight a war, and therefore that's a deterrent. But there's one final aspect here, and it's a question of morality.
Yes.
I mean, I believe nuclear weapons are immoral, that no one should have them, that these are horrendous weapons that designed to kill millions of people in the most horrible ways imaginable. There is no justification for this. I'm completely with Pope Francis on this, that no one should have nuclear weapons for any reason. That is such an extreme notion in this town. People never talk about the morality of nuclear weapons. So, Sean, I'm sorry. That's one of the big differences between people who argue that we should be moving towards nuclear disarmament and people who think that we should be arguing for the perpetuation of the killing machine we currently have.
Another week, another question. Thanks, Joe.
Thank you, Michelle, and thank you, Sean. I'm delighted to be here with Kate Folb from the Hollywood Health and Society Project at the Norman Lear Center. And Kate, I was just with you last week, the week before we're recording this, in Hollywood, where you were giving out your Sentinel Awards. Mm-hmm. And I got to tell you, that is the most impressive and moving award ceremony I have ever been to. I want you to tell us about this and the kinds of awards that you gave out, but you had actors and directors and producers and showrunners from Grace and Frankie, from This Is Us, from HBO, from Empire, from Mom, a situation comedy on CBS, all of whom were being awarded for writing on pressing social issues of our times, including addiction, sexual abuse, criminal justice, climate change, and for us, nuclear safety. The award went to Chernobyl. Can you just tell us a little bit about that night?
Oh, wow. Yes. The Sentinel Awards is sort of our darling of Hollywood Health and Society. It's our annual gala where we honor TV shows and series about important pro-social topics, health, science, medicine, and onward. For their great reach to audiences as well as their impact on audiences, and sometimes for taking the risk of addressing a topic that maybe television has been loath to present in the past. So the other thing is we like to honor the writers, the screenwriters of the show. In Hollywood, writers don't get a lot of love. Mm-hmm. It's usually the actors and the directors and, the big deal studio executives. But writers, it really starts with writers. It starts with the script. And so we want to highlight their good work and their good intentions on really caring about their audience, helping to inform and inspire their audiences to make better choices in their own lives.
Well, that's what came out to me being there, was how much these people cared about these issues. Just one, I know people are tuning into this podcast because it's about national security and nuclear policy, but one of the things that moved me the most was Sam Levinson, the director and writer of Euphoria, and you looked at the episode Made You Look, and the plot element was one of the young, this is a high school student, I think, and her struggle with addiction and lying about her addiction and how she's confronted by it. And so you had the actor who was involved presenting the award, and then Sam Levinson gets up and he starts off by saying, I've been sober for 15 years. And he talks about his addiction and his struggle every day with this addiction. It's not something that goes away. And that was just an example of the personal nature, how people cared about this. And it shows you that Hollywood is more than just studio moguls and problems and struggle for profit, that people care. Is that what you found in your work?
Absolutely, absolutely. And I'm always happy to highlight these shows and these writers because they do really care. And TV is not all, ego and fluff. There's lots of that out there too. But the writers in particular really do care, and they care about their audiences. And they usually, or often I should say, write about what they know, what their own personal experiences have been, or their own personal struggles. It may not be exactly their biography or their autobiography, but they take elements from their own personal lives and kind of work them out through their storytelling. Just a writer friend of mine was just saying, she writes for children, and she was telling children's programming, and she was telling me about how I don't write for kids. I write from my own childhood. Like, I'm still working out my own childhood. Yeah. And this is all me coming out and trying to sort it out. So especially with someone like Sam, who's dealing with addiction and who said, very honestly that he deals with it every day, that really came from his soul. And I think we all felt it in the room that night, because we were all in tears by the end of the evening after he spoke.
And you began. It was Marty Kaplan, I think, who said you're going to end up crying. And
and
we did. This was like an award ceremony unlike any I've seen. And this is all up on your website, by the way?
Yes. The full event, if you really want to watch it, will be on our website soon if it's not there yet. But they're
what's
just
the
putting
website?
it together. It's HollywoodHealthAndSociety.org. Just all one word, no ampersand, HollywoodHealthAndSociety.org.
Thank you. And, we did an event together last March.
Yes.
Again in Hollywood. This is one of the perks of being president of Ploughshares. I get to go to Hollywood. And we had Ben Rhodes, who's also there at the Sentinel Awards.
Yes, he presented to Chernobyl.
He presented to Chernobyl, gave a great speech. And we'll talk about that in a minute. But in March, we also had Michael Douglas, our former board member, come on. And we talked to him about how he saw the role of entertainers in this conveying these social messages. And he said, well, our number one job is to entertain, right? And that stayed
That's
with
right.
me. So how do you deal with that, knowing that the number one job is to entertain, is to get eyeballs, to get people watching the show? Tell us a little bit about what your project does to try to ingrain these issues into an entertainment vehicle.
Right. Yes, it's true. The number one job is to entertain. That's their goal. Their goal is to keep their show on the air and keep those eyeballs glued. But we know through our research, and I should say Hollywood Health and Society, we study and we help shape the impact that media have on audiences. So my project works specifically with entertainment, but the Lear Center at large also works in the news media and so forth. But our project is really to look at the impact it can have and then learn from those studies to go back to shows and tell them, what they can do. I don't want to say better, but maybe more impactful. And one thing we know is that audiences are not as dumb as you think they are. And I'm sure everybody listening knows about some show you've watched or a movie you've watched where something was inaccurate, and you immediately are taken out of the story. You immediately go, that's not true. You might even change the channel, God forbid, You might turn it off, or you've certainly lost that connection. And so it behooves writers and producers to be as accurate as possible about science and medicine and health and nukes and all these things, as accurate as they possibly can be, if they want to keep those eyeballs. So even if they don't care about the well-being of their audiences, it still behooves them to be as accurate as possible. Now, beyond that, there are many writers and producers and even networks that do really care about their audiences and want to help impart important information that might be beneficial to them in their own personal lives, especially around health and safety. So we provide a service, and it's free to the entertainment industry, to help consult with writers and connect writers with experts like yourself, who can come into the writer's room and sit down with the writers and talk about their expertise to help them get it right. We can do that via email. We can do it via phone conference, many ways to connect them. So as I say, and only people over a certain age will get this joke, but I always say we have operators standing by to take their calls. Okay, you just gave away your age. Yeah. So writers can call us or email us with quick questions, and we can either get that information for them or connect them with an expert who can then help them out to ensure they're as accurate as they possibly can be within the constraints of television.
And you brought me out there with a group of other experts, I think, including Jeffrey Lewis, who's been on this podcast, and Bruce Blair and others. And we met with some of the writers and directors from maybe 5 or 6 different shows, including NCIS or
Madam Secretary.
Madam Secretary. We've established a great connection there. We'll talk about that in just a bit. But it really was a wonderful. And this is one of the ways you do this. You bring the experts around to the writer's room, which is just fun to be in all by itself.
Yeah, it is fun. Well, so we do, our work is sort of reactive and proactive. So the reactive piece is what I just described, our hotline, and they can call or email us, and we'll help on any topic that they're interested in writing about.
Well, in fact, you were telling me about one that might be coming up. Well, you got a call from NCIS?
Yes, NCIS LA. So there's several NCISs. So this is NCIS Los Angeles. So they've called us about a topic or about a storyline I can't talk about yet because they're just as secretive as you guys are here in Washington about their work. So, but yes, so that's our reactive work. But we also do proactive work in which we call up shows and say, hey, I've got this cadre of amazing nuclear experts in town. Let me bring them by, and you can hear from them, and you can hear stories, and hopefully that will inspire them to then consider some of those topics and write about them.
And this is all under the auspices of the Norman Lear Center, and it was a privilege to meet him at the awards ceremony. He was very kind. He got a standing ovation when you introduced him to present the Climate Change Award to another episode of Madam Secretary. Why did he want to do this? What's his goal? Why did he start this project?
Well, if you know, again, people of a certain age who know who Norman Lear is, he is kind of the Shonda Rhimes of television from the 70s and 80s.
I have no idea who that person is, but go ahead.
All right. Well, Shonda Rhimes is like the huge television show creator of our time. She created Scandal. She created Grey's Anatomy. She's got a ton of shows. And she's sort of the darling of Hollywood now. Norman, although he's still a darling, in the 70s had probably 9 or 10 shows on the air at the same time.
Starting with All in the Family.
All in the Family. He wrote Mary Hartman. He had Maude. He had The Jeffersons. He had One Day at a Time. He had Good Times. I mean, he had a number of comedies on the air. I mean, the man was running from show to show.
Very successful, always socially conscious.
Very successful.
Why this project? Why this?
Well, so he was able to use his platform of entertainment to sort of heighten the conversation beyond just straight up comedy and straight up entertainment, to challenge viewers to think about what is important to them. And what he used to say was comedies before his shows were shows like I Love Lucy and some of these older Father Knows Best and all the rest. And the biggest problem that any of those families had was the boss is coming to dinner and mom's just burned the roast.
Right.
Oh dear, what do we do?
Exactly.
Right? And Norman Lear thought to himself, that's not how my family
Right.
talks.
The biggest crisis on Father Knows Best was if Bud was hiding a poor grade on his report card. You know?
So he, sort of took that situation comedy and turned it on its head and said, no, we're going to talk about racism. We're going to talk about the Vietnam War. We're going to talk about politics because that's what goes on in my household. So he really changed the way situation comedies or television in general, entertainment television in general, functioned and really, raised the bar about the issues that could be addressed within the context of entertainment. And so we take our lead from him, that we're here to help shows develop those meatier, more important storylines by providing them access to experts like you.
So you gave an award to Chernobyl. I think we're going to try to play a clip from Chernobyl. Let's see.
It's not 3 Röntgen. It's 15,000.
Comrade Savina.
What does that number mean? It means the core is open. It means the fire we're watching with our own eyes is giving off nearly twice the radiation released by the bomb in Hiroshima. And that's every single hour, hour after hour. 20 hours since the explosion, so 40 bombs worth by now. 48 more tomorrow, and it will not stop. Not in a week, not in a month. It will burn and spread its poison until the entire continent is dead.
And you were kind enough to invite me to be one of the judges for this. So I reviewed maybe 8 or 10 shows, clips, and Chernobyl was the standout winner. I mean, as soon as I saw that first episode, and I had not watched it previously, it just blew me away.
Yeah, it blew us all away. And Craig Mazin, who created the show and wrote the show, and who was there to accept the award, was very conscientious about being as accurate as possible in terms of everything from the costumes to, what actually happened to the science behind it all of it. He was very dedicated to getting it to be as accurate as possible. Frankly and honestly, we did not help on that. But you don't have to have worked with us to win a Sentinel Award because we want to honor anything that's as high quality as possible. So many of the shows that win haven't worked with us, then learn about us, and then work with us on their next project. But we were just blown away as well.
Enormously educational and really helped you understand what this was. And so when you hear things like the Fukushima catastrophe still unfolding and the radiation hazards, having seen Chernobyl, you have a feeling for what is happening in these other crises. It's just brilliant. But one show you did help with was Madam Secretary, who this is the modus operandi of their show. They're in their last season now, and they deliberately take on issues. How did you convince them or encourage them to take on nuclear issues?
Well, we called them up and said, hey, we've got a cadre of nuclear experts in town, yourself included, and said, let us bring them by. I mean, we've worked with the show in the past on issues like climate change and other things. So we had somewhat of a relationship with them. But and we know David Gray, one of the producers of the show, has a family member who's very involved in this world. The nuclear world, or in D.C. and in national security world, I should say.
Oh, yeah, his brother.
Yeah, his brother. So we knew he was interested in all of this. So we did. We called him up and said, we've got these guys in town and gals in town. Let us bring them by and have a chat. And we went to meet with them. And so at that time, they hadn't decided any particular storyline. They just were listening and soaking in the information and pondering what they might be able to do. And then throughout the course of that whole year, we did a number of inquiries and consultations with them with different experts. And then it resulted in that season finale last year.
Right. They did an episode called Night Watch, where they talk about a false alarm. What happens if the President of the United States is on the golf course, as he was, with his advisors, as he was, and the call comes in that we're under attack? A Russian nuclear attack is underway. What happens? How close do we come? So that was a brilliant, I think we have a clip of that episode. Let's play a little bit of that.
Early warning satellites detected multiple Russian launches.
What? Seligov can't be that crazy.
He said he'd hit us back after Syria.
By launching nukes?
Cover Falcon! Cover Falcon!
CIA psych eval of Salnikov indicated volatility and mood swings. We just killed 300 Russians in Aleppo.
Mr. President, I have STRATCOM.
Put him on speaker, Captain.
Yes, sir. Colonel McPherson is on the line.
McPherson?
Well, General Bradley is off duty, sir. NSC +5 is being patched in.
Colonel McPherson, what's the state rep?
Mr. President, SFARS is now tracking more than 400 Russian ICBMs, heading for U.S. mainland, striking in about 20 minutes.
So in the show, the United States comes within 2 minutes of launching all its nuclear forces back at Russia for this false alert before they find out it's a mistake. And this is because of the archaic Cold War posture we're on that requires us to launch on warning, what they call hair trigger alert. It concludes with this passionate argument where the Secretary of State, played by Tia Leone, is arguing for the necessity of changing this posture. Listen to this clip.
If there's a problem with our bombers, we have
14 stealth subs, each with more than enough warheads to destroy Russia. We have 100 nuclear-armed bombers. Clinging to the notion that we need to maintain ready alert ICBMs. That means STRATCOM has 3 minutes to make the call to the crisis coordinator, who has 2 minutes to call the president. And then POTUS has 5 minutes to make a decision. I talk about vulnerability. It's insanity. After what happened today, how could we come to any other conclusion?
Yeah, maybe you should stay in your lane, Elizabeth.
Not if you're going to blow up the entire highway, Gordon.
I have to tell you, that is the best fictional description I have ever seen or read or heard of what it would actually be like. And that argument in the Oval Office between the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense is exactly the line of arguments that go on. So David Gray did a beautiful job of capturing that. And thank you, Barbara Hall, the creator and executive producer of the show, for agreeing to put it on. She at first didn't want to do it, she told us.
Yeah, she didn't. She didn't want to do it. And she was sort of nervous about the topic at large. And we sort of eased her into it. We did a few episodes earlier in the season or even in the previous season, one about a dirty bomb that goes off in D.C., and then later something about the Iran deal, which we brought experts like yourself in to talk to them. And so we were kind of gently getting her more comfortable with the topic.
So this is what you do. This is what you work on. What's in the future for Hollywood Health and Society? Where do you go from here?
Well, next year, in 2020, we will be celebrating our 20th anniversary.
Really?
So nice branding and marketing hook for us. But so our annual Sentinel Awards is going to be even a much bigger event than the one you just attended. So we're excited to sort of really blow it out of the water, so to speak, and make a really big deal about this. God willing, Norman Lear will be with us, and we'll be able to sort of celebrate him and celebrate 20 years of doing this work and celebrate 20 years of the good work that these writers have done over the years, and maybe do a little, retrospective of some of the shows that have won over the years.
Well, I hope we're still on speaking terms, and I get to be asked back.
I'm sure we will be, because we'll probably be calling you before then to talk to NCIS LA. So
that's great. And if people want to find out more information about the Lear Center and your project, where do they go?
They go to HollywoodHealthAndSociety.org, and it's just all one word, lowercase, HollywoodHealthAndSociety.org, and you can learn all about us.
And how about all of our grantees and NGOs that are listening that want to take their issue and get it into a Hollywood production? How do they do that?
I welcome them. Well, they can also go to the website, and there you can find me and find my personal email to connect with me. And you can also look at some of the other projects that we've done. Again, we deal with health and medicine and science and things like criminal justice and climate change and all kinds of things. So I'd be glad to hear from you.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Kate, for taking the time to come in and talk with us.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Thanks for listening to Press the Button. This podcast is produced by Delphine Vigil, Zach Brown, Derek Zender, Alex Spire, and Will Lowry. Sound design by Derek Zender. Audio engineering by Derek Zender and Will Lowry. Research by Alex Spire. Our theme song is by Lyrics Born and the Poets of Rhythm, sampled with kind permission. Additional music by San Francisco-based bands 17 Evergreen and the Society of Rockets. To continue the dialogue and support our work, visit ploughshares.org.